Okay, well, looks like I just spent a lot of money. Hey, welcome back to Afternoon Garage. So today we're going to be looking at the oiling system as promised last week. There we go, that's a little better. So as I was saying, there's really three things that are wrong with the oiling system on this car. First of all, when I drove it, the oil level said it was high and the oil pressure said it was low. The gauges were all kind of goofy, so I want to see about that. Second thing was there was oil all over the bottom of the engine, and I think I pretty much solved all those problems by replacing the valve cover gaskets. I think that's pretty much where it was coming from almost exclusively. And the third thing is, when I bought the car, the guy told me that, yeah, it burnt oil and just on startup, then he had to replace the turbo, and I bought it that way. I knew that was a problem, and since he's already changed the turbo, I'm going to start looking elsewhere. One thing that might be helpful here is to mock it all up. Like, you know, maybe I'll see if I can put the engine next to the oil tank and see, you know, we can look at where the oil lines go, because, you know, it was really kind of complicated. There was some stuff that was brazed onto the bottom. I'm really not quite sure what that's about. So maybe I'll learn something and come up with a solution. Let's take this apart. Uh-oh. Take that back to the bench and check that out. That doesn't look good. This is an oil cooler thermostat, and when it reaches temperature, it actually opens a valve, circulates oil to the front. Most of the time it just kind of loops around in this thing, so it's got to be operational. And I can see that the threads are wasted on here, so that's not very good. It's aluminum threads, and I put some PB blaster on it, but apparently that didn't work. This probably have to replace the cooler lines too. This is actually a hydraulic fitting I can recognize, so this probably doesn't belong here. And same with this end. So yeah, I guess I'll have to be buying one of these. I have no idea what these cost, but well, I got the oil tank that these lines connected to all cleaned up, all degreased, and ready to take the paint off. So hopefully I'll have a little more luck working on that part than I have had here. Well, you can see most of this paint's chipping off. I got it pretty clean. Did the other side, it came out pretty good. So I'm going to test it for leaks again. Let's blast all this off and get it painted. Alright, well, here's that nasty greasy oil tank that I cleaned up. Cleaned up fairly well. I noticed it had some, you know, some brazing done down in here in this area. And, yeah, that's an interesting sound. And also this was the oil level sensor. You can see there's probably something going on there, because that probably wouldn't work. As well as, well, the wire's broken, so yeah, pretty much everything's destroyed on this car, as predicted. But more importantly, what the hell is that? Like, there's all kinds of stuff in here. So I think now, oh my gosh. Okay, so The dipstick kind of goes in like this through that hole. And well, I guess if you miss it, you put it down inside the tank. Well, that wasn't very good. Yeah, I guess I have two dipsticks now. The one that was in it and the one, the original. I know that this is an original Porsche one. This is how it's supposed to be shaped. I don't know what this one was. But if you hold them up together, boy, the min and the maximum are completely different. So definitely want to go back. It looks like it was, that would have low oil if it's quite a bit longer. Oh no. And something else in here. It doesn't look like it's coming out of there too easy. It looks like there's a screen right next to it. It's kind of keeping it from, well, it's definitely the oil float. So maybe I can get something in there, pull that screen back a little bit so we can get that out of there.
Six months later.
There we go. Right out of the bottom. Okay, so that's the float for this. I think it kind of clips on there like that. Anyway, I'll be getting a new one of these and painting this tank up. I think I'm going to put a little JB weld on this bronze down here. Kind of paint it up, get it back on there. It's looking pretty good so far. Well, you can see the oil tank looks pretty good. Got a new oil level sender in there, and of course had to buy the thermostat for the front and a new oil cooler line. So all this wasn't cheap, but I kind of went and marked it so we can tell which way goes where. This is a 3.3 flat 6, and it's got 3 oil pumps in it. 3 separate individual oil pumps. So the first oil pump actually draws from the bottom of the oil tank right here and goes in through the bottom of the oil cooler. There's a thermostat, and the thermostat determines whether or not it wants to actually cool the oil before it gets distributed to the motor. It goes down in the bottom area of the motor, and then it gets actually pumped by a scavenge pump, and that comes out underneath here in a line connected to the side. So when it comes out there, it travels along here to this oil thermostat. Now the oil cooler thermostat determines whether or not it's hot or not, and if it is, it opens up, drops down the bottom. Otherwise, it goes back to the tank, and then into the tank, where it goes through the filter, gets filtered, and then gets dropped back into the tank. Okay, so that's 2 oil pumps right there. So this is a turbo scavenge pump, and what it does is it removes oil from the bottom of the turbo. There's a small little tank down there, and it pumps it in through the bottom, and then pumps it out the top, where it goes across the other side of the motor, and into the bottom of the oil tank. On a 930 oil tank, there's supposed to be a vent tube that goes all the way up to the top. You also have this system here, which is kind of the breather system. This is also kind of a catch can, and it too kind of drops down, goes down below the tins, and then also connects to the bottom of the oil tank. Starting to think about the kind of problem I'm having with possibly oil coming through the seals of the turbo, and you know, I don't know anything about the lines that were brazed onto the bottom of that tank. They looked terrible when I first got the car, so I cleaned them up quite a bit and sealed them and made sure that they weren't leaking, but maybe has something to do with that, as far as maybe some venting problems or something. I have read that this scavenge line here, if this line going into the bottom of the tank isn't vented correctly up to the top of the tank, now naturally you can see it would just act like a siphon, and it would pretty much drain all the oil from the tank through this line here, back through the pump, and into the turbo sump where it would fill up the turbo sump. So it's possible that that's what's going on here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a check valve in.
1 week later.
That's amazing what you can find online. So this is actually just a regular one-way check valve. Has a little rubber diaphragm in there. It's good for oil and fuel. And you know, 3/8 in, 3/8 out, has barbs on them already. And then I was kind of thinking about something maybe a little more heavy duty rather than to rely on this thing. So I got a hydraulic check valve, and it takes one hell of a lot of pressure to open it up. It's like 50 pounds of oil pressure. So I didn't even really think that's got to be one hell of a spring in there. So don't want to really use that. I got the check valve. I was going to put the check valve in. And I was just kind of looking at how this whole thing's laid out here, and it really kind of pumps the trash oil, what they call coke, from the bottom of the turbo oil tank in the front, and runs it right into the oil tank, and it doesn't really ever get filtered. So I was also doing some research online, and people have said that they sometimes run a filter on this line before it gets into the tank. So it's an additional filter you'd have to change. In addition to, I'm going to have to add this because somebody didn't buy the correct oil tank. So that's going to be my fix for that. But I was going to put a filter on this, and I kind of thought of maybe I could do something a little cleaner and easier. Here's kind of what I came up with. And I ran into a write-up on the internet where somebody actually was able to take this line coming out of the scavenge pump here and then filter it. We had a kind of a filter sitting back on the cross member back there, and it went back on here, and it actually got dumped in the breather cover here. And you know what would happen then would be the scavenge pump for the entire engine would then pick it up and pump it through the cooler lines back into the tank to get filtered. So at that point it would get filtered, but I really still don't want to run that into the engine. So maybe I'll find some real estate somewhere. I think that I've seen some where people actually put it in this area, but I'm going to retain the stock air cleaner. So maybe there's some room over here where an air pump was, and I'll see if I can fit it over here and kind of make it come out, maybe go that direction through a filter. Be a little bit hard to change, but you know what? It'll be good to have like an 80 or 100 micron filter before you dump it back into the bottom of the engine and it gets taken out and distributed throughout the system to remove that coke out of there, because, well, nobody likes coke.
Well, I once tried to snort coke, but the ice cubes got stuck in my nose.
Especially in your engine. We'll see if I can drill some holes and I'll get this mocked up, see what it looks like. Well, looks like we're not going to use this check valve anymore. So anyway, this is what we have here. I have a 100 micron filter, and it's got a pretty good capacity, and it's cleanable, so that'll be good. A couple 90s and a 180. This is all AN6 or 6AN, however you want to say that. And then I'm going to come out of there. I'm going to go into the breather with a 1/2 inch MPT, so I'm going to have to drill a big hole. And also what you have here is you have a 14 by 1.5 to 6AN adapter for the scavenge pump. So let's find a spot for that, see how it looks like on the motor. You know, the more I look at this, the more I realize, well, there's not a lot of room back here to put hardly anything. I think I'm going to choose this area right here. Just kind of fit it somewhere in this neighborhood. You know, I did make a plate out of a piece of 1/4 inch aluminum, and looks like it's going to fit pretty well. It'll just kind of fit flat against the intake manifold here, and then we'll bolt the filter right to the plate. So after the oil goes through that filter, it's going to have to be dumped back into the crankcase. So I think what I'm going to do is put it right into the breather cover here. There it is. I think we'll just drill and tap, maybe put a 45 in there, and I'll connect it to the filter. stretch now, just making the hoses now. So I made sure I got the right ones and didn't mix them up. Made this one a little bit extra longer to cover the throttle cable. The tin snips probably weren't the best thing to use on this. And what it does is it leaves kind of a fray there. And these are metal reinforced, which so what you don't want to have happen is you don't want any metal going inside the tube when you try to jam these things together, because they will leak. So my recommendation is just to kind of just give it a haircut like that, and just kind of cut some of this off a little bit. But the hard part is getting this inside of there, and it never really kind of happens. You always have maybe a wire hanging out or something, and it can be really frustrating at times to try to get that in there. So that's what this is. So this is about $80, and it has 6, 8, and 10 sizes. And then what you can do here is put the nut inside here, the flare end out, and then you kind of want to take up, see it's kind of loose, so you want to take up that space in there so that it's pushed right up against that. You can kind of see it's like a funnel. So what happens is that, close this up. So what happens here is you just kind of push this on there with a twisting motion. There we go. And you can see it put it right up in there without anything coming out or anything like that. So now you can simply just kind of screw it onto here, put that in there and screw it together and be done. And I left this one a little long and kind of bent it upwards to clear that throttle rod that goes down in the transmission. So it should be fine there. You know, I like the way this looks, and it's going to solve two different problems. First of all, it's going to solve the problem where, you know, the oil tank just kind of drains back over and, well, fills up the turbo. One thing I noticed that there was a whole lot of oil on the intake side and not so much on the exhaust well, because the exhaust side, it would just burn off and come out the tailpipe, whereas in the intake, when it pulls down there, it just had nowhere to go. So definitely going to solve that. Another thing is we don't have to put that coked oil back into, you know, the engine. We can actually filter it right here, so that's a good thing. I'll have to remember change that filter, you know, probably when you change the engine oil. Actually, it's cleanable filter, which is really good. And another thing it did was it took that line that went over to the other side and really simplified everything. Everything's on the engine block. You know, we don't have the filter on the back firewall or anything like that. It's kind of all self-contained right in here. Drops down in the sump, and the scavenge pump for the main engine itself should be plenty, because the turbo, well, it really doesn't consume that much oil. So the amount that it sucks out of the turbo sump there, not a whole lot, should be sufficient. I'm really happy about this fix. Beats a check valve from China. Boy, that looked like a simple fix to my problem, huh? Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. You know, I mean, everything kind of went together like it should. Looks great. Functions well. I added some functionality, as well as, you know, I didn't have to vent that tube in the oil tank. No check valves, nothing kind of weird going on there. Just the way it's supposed to be. So next week, we'll be working on some of the bodywork. I think most of the damage that occurred back here was probably because there were so many mechanics working on this car trying to solve that oil problem over the years that, well, you know, bolts were swapped, things were kind of halfway put back together. I kind of gather that, well, it's been like that for many, many years. That's why the car wasn't driven. Really anxious to get this back together and see how it runs, and if it runs at all. Hey, if you got anything out of this, give me a like and subscribe if you haven't. Till next time.